My mom's 20-year boyfriend tried acting like my dad, so I gave him a crash course in responsibilities. My mom's boyfriend tried playing dad from the day he moved in, and I don't mean that in the supportive, I'll help raise you kind of way. I mean it like he'd interrupt stories about my real dad to say, well, I'm your father now. If I saved money from my job, he'd demand to approve my purchases because fathers oversee finances. If I had friends over, he'd pull them aside to introduce himself as my dad and warn them to treat his son with respect. The fake father act started small, but got more delusional every month. First, he insisted on having man-to-man talks about my grades while he hadn't worked in 3 years. When report cards came, he demanded to see them first so he could sign them with this dramatic flourish, signing them as Rick Father. Like the parenthesis made it true. But when my teacher requested a parent conference, Rick suddenly remembered he wasn't on any school paperwork and sent mom alone. On Father's Day, he actually expected a card and breakfast in bed because he'd been raising me for 6 months. The driving lessons were their own nightmare, where he screamed about mirrors for 3 hours, but wouldn't let me use his car for the actual DMV test because insurance was too expensive. By year 2, everything became his house, and he took down all Dad's photos to put up pictures of himself. When I tried putting Dad's picture back, Rick said I needed to accept that he was my father now. Everything exploded the week my dad's mom was dying. Grandma had called asking to see me one last time, and Rick intercepted the call saying all family decisions went through him now. When I tried to leave anyway, he took my car keys and phone because I shouldn't go anywhere without his permission. Grandma died 2 hours later while I sat locked in my room. At the funeral, Rick wore my dead father's suit from the closet and introduced himself to relatives as my dad. He told them I'd been too difficult to handle, which is why I'd missed saying goodbye. Then things got even worse when the lawyer read her will. Grandma left me $40,000 for college and revealed that Dad's life insurance had paid off the house in my name when I turned 18, but Mom had never told me. Mom only had lifetime residency rights that Dad had set up to protect me. Rick's face went red and he announced to everyone that he'd be managing this money as my father figure. When I said no, he grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises and hissed that my real dad was dead, and either I'd put that money in his account or find somewhere else to live tonight. Mom stood there before saying maybe Rick was right about me needing guidance with that kind of money. Rick smiled and said, see, I'm your father now whether you like it or not. That's when something in me snapped completely. If Rick wanted to be my father so badly, he could have all the responsibilities that came with it. Mom's annual work conference was coming up in 2 weeks, and I spent that time making some interesting phone calls. Rick's ex-wife was surprisingly eager to chat about why she divorced him and mentioned the $15,000 in back child support he owed for 3 kids he never visited. She explained how he worked construction under the table to avoid wage garnishment and used his mother's address on all official documents. The code enforcement office was also very interested in photos I sent of his illegal electrical work in the garage that he'd done last summer. 2 days after Mom left for her conference, I made my move. First, I called child support enforcement with Rick's real address and current job site. Then I called code enforcement about those violations. I changed every streaming password and the Wi-Fi password, and then I filed an eviction notice giving him the legal 30 days since the house was mine. Rick was watching the game when the internet cut out and he started screaming about the Wi-Fi. I walked downstairs with the eviction papers and placed them on his lap. His face went from confused to purple as he read them. You can't kick me out of my own house. I'm your father. This is my house. He crumpled the papers and threw them at me, then grabbed his phone to call Mom. She didn't answer because she was in meetings. He tried to shove past me to get to my room, but I stood firm and told him the sheriff was already on the way. The sheriff arrived at the same time as child support enforcement and the code inspector. Rick went from screaming at me to begging them to explaining this was all a misunderstanding. They served him papers while he kept insisting he was my father and had rights. His wages got garnished on the spot, and he realized he couldn't afford his motorcycle payments anymore. He had to move back with his elderly mother at 45 years old because no landlord would rent to someone with that much debt and an eviction. Mom finally saw him clearly when he called begging for money instead of getting a real job. She realized he wanted all the authority of being a father with none of the actual responsibility. I let Mom stay in the house, but Rick was banned from the property.